15 years ago, a vibrant young teacher disappeared after a school fundraiser in Cleveland, Ohio, leaving her family shattered and a community on edge. Police suspected her estranged husband, a jealous colleague, and even a local delivery driver with a criminal record. But with minimal evidence and no body, the investigation hit one dead end after another. Over the years, her father never stopped searching, sending handwritten letters to detectives every month, clinging to hope that his daughter was still alive somewhere. Then suddenly in 2021, when a rookie detective reopened the dusty file and applied modern technology to forgotten evidence, a startling discovery emerged. A revelation that would not only solve the case, but would forever change how Cleveland viewed one of its most trusted community members. The morning of October 3, 2006, in Cleveland, Ohio, dawned crisp and clear, with early autumn sunlight casting long shadows across the city. Fallen leaves skittered along sidewalks, the air carried a hint of wood smoke, and frost sparkled on windshields. The suburban streets hummed with the familiar rhythm of another Tuesday, garbage trucks rumbling past, children waiting at bus stops with backpacks, and commuters clutching travel mugs as they hurried to their cars. Amidst this ordinary morning routine, Melissa Parker, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher, left her brick townhouse in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood. Known for her infectious laugh and dedication to her students, Melissa stepped out wearing a burgundy cardigan over a floral dress, her dark hair pulled back in her signature low ponytail. She carried her laptop bag and a box of supplies for the fall festival her school was hosting that weekend. As she loaded items into her blue Honda Accord, her neighbor Frank Wilson was clearing leaves from his driveway. He looked up, waved, and called out, "Morning, Melissa. Big day today?" Melissa smiled, returned the wave, and replied, "Huge day. Final planning for the festival. The kids are so excited." She slid into her car, adjusted her rearview mirror, and pulled away from the curb. This brief, mundane exchange would later become the last confirmed sighting of Melissa Parker alive. 20 minutes later, a traffic camera at the corner of Carnegie Avenue and East 89th Street captured grainy footage of a blue Honda matching Melissa's, stopped at a red light. The timestamp read 7:38 a.m. The driver's face was obscured, but the silhouette matched Melissa's build. When the light turned green, the car proceeded east, vanishing from the frame and seemingly from existence. By 8:30 a.m., Melissa's chair in the faculty meeting at Roosevelt Elementary remained conspicuously empty. At first, her colleagues assumed she was running late or dealing with car trouble. But as 9:00 a.m. passed, then 10:00 a.m., with no call or message, unease spread through the school. Melissa had never missed a day without notice in her 8-year teaching career. The school secretary called Melissa's cell phone repeatedly, each time being directed straight to voicemail. By noon, the principal contacted Melissa's emergency contact, her father, Robert Parker. "Mr. Parker, I'm sorry to worry you, but Melissa didn't come in today and no one can reach her. Is she with you by any chance?" Robert Parker, a retired postal worker who lived alone since his wife's passing 3 years earlier, felt his heart sink. Melissa always called him each evening, a ritual that had not been broken once since she moved into her own place. Last night's call had been entirely normal. They'd discussed the upcoming school festival, her plans to start a reading club for struggling students, and whether she should adopt a cat for company. "She's not with me," Robert replied, his voice tight with sudden concern. "Have you checked with anyone else? This isn't like her at all." The hours that followed unfolded with increasing dread. Robert drove to Melissa's townhouse, using his emergency key to enter. Everything looked normal. Dishes washed and put away, bed neatly made, a half-empty cup of tea on the coffee table. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom. There was no sign of a struggle, no hint of what might have happened. The only notable absence was Melissa herself, along with the blue Honda Accord that should have been parked outside. By 3 p.m., Robert Parker stood in the Cleveland Police Department's 2nd District Station, formally reporting his daughter missing. The officer taking the report maintained a professional demeanor, but Robert could sense the unspoken assessment. A 32-year-old woman missing for less than a day was not considered high priority. Adults had the right to disappear if they chose. Still, given Melissa's spotless employment record and her father's conviction that something was wrong, the officer agreed to issue a bolo, "Be on the lookout," for Melissa's car. "We'll keep an eye out, sir," the officer assured Robert. "But in most cases like this, the person turns up within 24 hours. Maybe she just needed some time alone." Robert shook his head firmly. "Not my Melissa. She'd never worry her students like this. Something's happened to her, I'm certain of it." As Robert left the station, Cleveland continued its normal Tuesday rhythm. Buses running their routes, people shopping for dinner, children playing in parks. But for Robert Parker, the city had transformed into something sinister, a vast maze where his only child had somehow vanished without warning or explanation. Night fell over Cleveland, unusually cold for early October. In his empty house, Robert sat by the phone, willing it to ring, desperate to hear his daughter's voice. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." By midnight, with no word from Melissa, Robert couldn't bear waiting any longer. Despite the late hour, he drove through Cleveland's streets, stopping at hospitals, all-night diners, and anywhere else he could think of. He showed Melissa's photo to night shift workers, taxi drivers, and security guards. No one recognized her. The blue Honda was nowhere to be seen. Dawn broke on October 4th, and with it, the official search for Melissa Parker began in earnest. Her disappearance now warranted serious concern. Detectives Jackson and Reyes were assigned to the case, arriving at Melissa's townhouse by 8 a.m. to conduct a thorough search. They noted nothing obviously missing except her phone and the clothes she was wearing when last seen. Her passport remained in a desk drawer. Her credit cards hadn't been used since a coffee shop purchase the previous morning. As they worked, Melissa's colleagues from Roosevelt Elementary gathered outside. The principal had cancelled classes for the day, and teachers came bearing stacks of flyers with Melissa's photo. "Missing Melissa Parker, 32, last seen Tuesday morning in Tremont area." The image showed Melissa at the school's spring fair, smiling broadly, her dark hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright with characteristic enthusiasm. "She's the heart of our school," the principal told Detective Jackson, her voice breaking. "The children adore her, and she was spearheading our fall festival this weekend. She would never just disappear, especially not now." By noon, volunteers plastered flyers across Cleveland, on utility poles, shop windows, community boards, and car windshields. Local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Melissa's photo during their midday reports. "Cleveland teacher missing under mysterious circumstances," the anchors announced, their tones grave. "Police are asking anyone with information to come forward." The investigation accelerated when, at 3:17 p.m., Officer Martinez spotted a blue Honda Accord matching Melissa's description, parked in a remote corner of Edgewater Park's overflow lot. The license plate confirmed it was her vehicle. Crime scene technicians descended on the car, setting up floodlights and evidence markers as they worked. The car's doors were locked, with no obvious signs of forced entry. Inside, Melissa's laptop bag sat on the passenger seat, containing her computer, wallet with all credit cards present, and a folder of festival planning notes. Her cell phone was nowhere to be found. The keys were still in the ignition. Most disturbing was a small brownish smear on the driver's side window. Suspected blood, though lab confirmation would be needed. Robert Parker arrived at the scene, just as technicians were preparing to tow the Honda to the forensic garage. He stood behind the police tape, watching in silent agony as his daughter's car was winched onto a flatbed truck. Detective Reyes approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Parker, I want you to know we're treating this as a high-priority case," she said. "Finding this car changes everything. We're going to do everything possible to locate your daughter." Robert nodded, unable to speak. The sight of Melissa's empty car, abandoned in a park far from her usual routes, confirmed his worst fears. Something terrible had happened to his only child. As the tow truck pulled away, carrying what might be the last trace of Melissa, Robert felt his world collapse around him. That evening, as darkness fell over Cleveland again, the search expanded. Police boats scanned the shoreline near where the car was found. Officers with flashlights combed through the dense wooded areas surrounding the park. K9 units followed scent trails that seemed to lead from the car toward the lake before losing the trace. News helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights joining the search effort while broadcasting live footage to anxious viewers across northeast Ohio. The abandoned car of missing teacher Melissa Parker has been found at Edgewater Park, reporters announced. Police have not confirmed whether foul play is suspected, but the discovery has intensified concerns for her safety. In homes across Cleveland, parents held their children closer. Teachers who had worked with Melissa sat glued to their televisions, hoping for positive news. At Roosevelt Elementary, the custodian quietly removed the Fall Festival coming soon banner from the front entrance. No one had the heart to continue planning the event without Melissa. As the second night of her disappearance settled over the city, the initial shock began to transform into something darker: fear. If a beloved teacher could vanish on her way to work, leaving only an abandoned car and unanswered questions, who else might be vulnerable? Parents began driving their children to bus stops rather than letting them walk. Women started carrying pepper spray and traveling in groups. Cleveland, typically resilient and practical, found itself gripped by a collective dread. For the investigators, the clock was ticking. Statistics showed that the chances of finding a missing person decreased dramatically after the first 48 hours. Those crucial hours were already slipping away, with precious few leads to follow. The blood smear on the window represented their best hope, if it proved to be blood at all, and if it yielded usable DNA. In the cramped confines of the 2nd District Conference Room, a timeline was taking shape on a large whiteboard. Melissa leaving home, 7:20 a.m. Traffic camera sighting, 7:38 a.m. Expected arrival at school, 8:15 a.m. Never arrived. Car discovery, 3:17 p.m. on October 4th. Between those sparse entries stretched vast unknowns, gaps that needed filling before they could understand what had happened to Melissa Parker. Detective Jackson stood before the board late that night, coffee cup in hand, tie loosened, eyes red from exhaustion. "Someone saw something," he muttered to his partner. "A woman doesn't just vanish between a traffic light and her workplace without leaving traces. We're missing something." "Maybe she went to Edgewater willingly," Detective Reyes suggested. "Changed her mind about going to work, needed some time to think." Jackson shook his head. "And left her laptop, her wallet, the keys in the ignition." No, something interrupted her journey. Something or someone. As they debated theories, the lab called with preliminary results. The smear on the window was indeed blood, though whether it belonged to Melissa remained to be determined. The amount was small, consistent with a minor injury rather than a life-threatening wound. Still, its presence on the driver's window suggested a struggle had occurred, however brief or limited. "We need to look deeper into her life," Jackson decided. "Friends, relationships, conflicts at work. Someone knows something about what happened to Melissa Parker." The investigation expanded, revealing dimensions to Melissa's life that even her father hadn't fully known. 3 key individuals emerged as persons of interest, each with potential motives and unclear alibis for the morning Melissa vanished. First was Daniel Parker, Melissa's estranged husband. They had separated 8 months earlier after 5 years of marriage, filing for divorce, but not yet finalizing the proceedings. Colleagues described occasional tense phone calls Melissa received at school, after which she appeared upset. Financial records showed joint accounts being divided, with disagreements over certain assets. When questioned, Daniel appeared disheveled and defensive, claiming he was at a gym during the critical hours on October 3rd. The gym confirmed he checked in, but security footage showed gaps when he wasn't visible in the facility. The second person of interest was Kevin Marshall, a fellow teacher at Roosevelt Elementary. Interviews with staff revealed he had pursued Melissa romantically after her separation, but she had gently rejected him, preferring to maintain a professional relationship. Some teachers noted Kevin seemed unable to accept this boundary, often finding reasons to be near Melissa or offering unsolicited help with her projects. On the morning of October 3rd, Kevin had called in sick to Roosevelt Elementary but couldn't provide concrete evidence of his whereabouts. The third suspect emerged unexpectedly from Melissa's phone records. In the weeks before her disappearance, she had received multiple calls from a number belonging to Alan Brenner, a delivery driver with a record of harassment complaints who had brought packages to Roosevelt Elementary regularly. School security footage showed several instances where Brenner lingered talking to Melissa longer than necessary. More concerning, his delivery route on October 3rd would have put him near Carnegie Avenue around the time Melissa's car was last captured on traffic cameras. When interviewed, Brenner became agitated, insisting he barely knew the teacher lady and had no idea where she might be. Each suspect was questioned extensively, their homes searched with warrants, their vehicles examined for trace evidence. Each had potential opportunity. Each had possible motives. Each denied any involvement in Melissa's disappearance. Without more concrete evidence, investigators couldn't focus exclusively on any one suspect. Meanwhile, the community rallied around the search effort. Volunteers gathered daily at a command center established in Roosevelt Elementary's gymnasium. They organized into search teams, methodically covering neighborhoods, parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas throughout Cleveland. Local businesses donated food, water, and printing services for updated flyers. A Facebook group dedicated to finding Melissa gained thousands of members within days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Robert Parker became a fixture on local news, his initially steady voice growing more haggard with each appearance. "Please, if anyone has seen my daughter or has any information, come forward," he pleaded. "Melissa is a wonderful person who has touched so many lives through her teaching. She deserves to come home." As days stretched into a week, then 2 weeks, the initial frenzy of media coverage began to wane. New stories competed for attention. Search teams grew smaller. The investigation continued, but without fresh leads, momentum slowed. For Cleveland, life reluctantly resumed its normal patterns, though with a new undercurrent of caution and awareness. But Robert Parker refused to let his daughter be forgotten. When media interest dwindled, he printed new flyers himself. When official searches were scaled back, he continued walking the shoreline daily, scanning the water and woods with tireless determination. When friends gently suggested he prepare himself for the worst, he firmly shook his head. "Until I know differently, my daughter's out there somewhere, and I won't stop looking." October turned to November, then December. Christmas decorations appeared throughout Cleveland, but Robert's house remained unadorned. He spent the holiday sitting by his phone, as he did every day, waiting for the call that never came. The new year arrived, bringing snow and bitter cold that further complicated search efforts. The case file grew thick with interview transcripts, forensic reports, and investigative dead ends, but no conclusive answers emerged. The blood on the car window had been confirmed as Melissa's, but the amount was insufficient to indicate fatal injury. The 3 suspects remained under scrutiny, but none could be definitively linked to her disappearance. Traffic cameras had yielded nothing beyond that single sighting at 7:38 a.m. It was as if Melissa Parker had driven to Edgewater Park and simply vanished, leaving behind everything except her cell phone. In January 2007, the Cleveland Police Department officially classified Melissa's case as cold. Resources were redirected to more recent crimes, with more promising leads. Detective Jackson broke the news to Robert personally, sitting in the older man's living room where Melissa's photos watched from every wall. "This doesn't mean we're giving up," Jackson assured him. "It just means we've exhausted our current avenues of investigation. The case remains open. Any new information will be followed up immediately." Robert nodded stiffly, his face a mask of contained grief. "I understand how these things work, Detective. But I need you to understand something too. I will never stop looking for my daughter, never." True to his word, Robert Parker became Cleveland's most persistent civilian investigator. Every month, he sent handwritten letters to the police department, reminding them of Melissa's case and asking about any new techniques or technologies that might help. He drove to Edgewater Park weekly, walking the same paths, asking the same questions of regular park visitors. On each anniversary of Melissa's disappearance, he held a candlelight vigil at Roosevelt Elementary, where a memorial garden had been planted in her honor. For most of Cleveland, the mystery of the vanished teacher gradually faded into urban legend, a cautionary tale parents told teenage daughters, a sad footnote in Roosevelt Elementary's history, an occasional reference when similar cases made news. But for Robert Parker and for the investigators who had worked the case, Melissa's disappearance remained an open wound, painful, unhealed, and impossible to forget. Years slipped away with the rhythm of seasons, winter snow melting into spring rain, hot summers fading to crisp autumns, then back to winter again. The search for Melissa Parker became a footnote in Cleveland's collective memory, but for those directly involved, it remained an unhealed wound. Robert Parker's hair turned completely white, his shoulders gradually stooping with the weight of uncertainty, but his determination never wavered. Every morning he woke before dawn, shuffled to his kitchen table, and wrote in a journal addressed to his missing daughter. "Day 1, 8:25 without you, Melissa," he wrote on the 5th anniversary of her disappearance. "The garden at your school is blooming beautifully this year. Your students, they're in high school now, still leave flowers by your memorial bench." Detective Anthony Jackson, who had led the initial investigation, transferred to homicide, then eventually retired. But the Parker case haunted his dreams. Sometimes he'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced he'd missed something crucial. He kept a copy of the case file in his home office, reviewing it occasionally, hoping fresh eyes might spot an overlooked detail. Meanwhile, Cleveland changed around them. Roosevelt Elementary got a new principal. The staff turnover meant fewer teachers remembered Melissa personally. The three main suspects moved on with their lives, though they remained under a cloud of unofficial suspicion. Daniel Parker, Melissa's estranged husband, finally completed their divorce in absentia and relocated to Colorado. Kevin Marshall, the teacher with unrequited feelings for Melissa, transferred to a suburban district. Alan Brenner, the delivery driver with the concerning record, served 18 months for an unrelated harassment charge before disappearing from Ohio entirely. The technology of investigation evolved too. Surveillance cameras became higher resolution and more widespread. DNA analysis grew more sophisticated. Cell phone tracking advanced significantly. Social media expanded, creating digital footprints for nearly everyone. But none of these advancements helped Melissa's case, frozen in the technology and evidence of 2006. Then, in early 2021, nearly 15 years after Melissa vanished, something shifted. Detective Sophia Martinez, newly promoted to Cleveland's cold case unit, selected Melissa's file from the archive as her first major review. What began as a routine re-examination of old evidence would soon unsettle an entire community and bring long-buried secrets into the harsh light of truth. Martinez was 34, just 2 years older than Melissa had been when she disappeared. Reading through the yellowed case notes and looking at photos of the missing teacher, Martinez felt an uncomfortable kinship. "We could have been friends," she thought, studying Melissa's smiling face in a staff photo from Roosevelt Elementary. "We might have had coffee together, complained about dating in our 30s, shared book recommendations." This personal connection drove Martinez to approach the case with extraordinary thoroughness. She created a fresh timeline on her apartment wall, connecting events with red yarn, like a scene from a detective show. She reread every witness statement, noting inconsistencies and unanswered questions. She tracked down and interviewed former Roosevelt staff members who had never been formally questioned. Most significantly, Martinez catalogued all physical evidence that had been collected but never fully analyzed due to technological limitations of 2006. The blood smear from the car window, fingerprints that couldn't be matched to any database, soil samples from the car's tire treads, fibers found on the driver's seat. Each item potentially held answers if examined with modern forensic techniques. "I'd like to resubmit these for current analysis," Martinez told her supervisor, laying out evidence bags on his desk. "The original tests were limited by 2006 technology. We can do better now." Her supervisor eyed the budget sheets skeptically. "Cold cases aren't priority for lab resources, Martinez. You know that. What makes you think this one's worth the expense?" Martinez slid Melissa's photo forward. "Because someone got away with this for 15 years. Because her father still walks the lakefront every Sunday looking for her. Because whatever happened to her, she deserves justice, even if it's late." After a long pause, her supervisor signed the authorization forms. "Don't make promises to the family," he warned. "Chances are still slim after all this time." But Martinez had already decided to visit Robert Parker. She found him in the same modest house where he'd raised Melissa, now cluttered with 15 years of collected newspapers, missing person flyers, and investigation notes. At 73, Robert's once powerful frame had diminished, but his eyes remained sharp and alert when Martinez introduced herself. "Another detective," he said, neither surprised nor particularly hopeful. "I've met many over the years." "I know," Martinez acknowledged, accepting the offered seat in his living room. "I've read all their notes. But I'm approaching Melissa's case differently. We have new technologies, new databases, new ways of connecting evidence that weren't available in 2006. Robert's weathered hands trembled slightly as he poured her tea. "Do you know how many times I've heard similar promises? DNA advancements in 2009, computer reconstructions in 2012, social media outreach campaigns in 2015. None brought me any closer to knowing what happened to my daughter." Martinez nodded, understanding his weariness. "I can't promise results, Mr. Parker, but I can promise effort, real sustained effort. I've submitted the physical evidence for new testing. I'm rebuilding the investigation from the ground up." "Why?" Robert asked bluntly. "Why this case? Why now?" Martinez considered the question carefully. "Because I believe Melissa deserves justice. Because cold cases aren't just files to me, they're people. And because sometimes fresh eyes see what tired ones miss." Something in her sincerity reached through Robert's protective shell of disappointment. "She loved autumn best," he said unexpectedly, gesturing to a photo of Melissa in a park surrounded by golden leaves. "Said the world felt most alive just when everything was preparing to sleep. It was the beginning of a connection that would sustain them both through the difficult months ahead." Robert became Martinez's unofficial partner, sharing insights about Melissa that weren't captured in official reports. Martinez kept him updated on every development, no matter how small. Together, they maintained hope when the first round of retested evidence yielded nothing new. Then 4 months into the investigation, the forensics lab called Martinez with news that sent a shock through the case. The blood smear from Melissa's car window, previously confirmed as hers, contained microscopic cellular material that didn't belong to her. In 2006, the technology couldn't detect or analyze these trace elements. In 2021, advanced DNA extraction techniques recovered enough genetic material to create a partial profile. "It's not complete enough for a direct database match," the lab technician explained, "but it gives us something we didn't have before." Martinez immediately thought of the 3 original suspects. Daniel Parker, the estranged husband, had provided a DNA sample during the original investigation. Kevin Marshall and Alan Brenner had as well. None had matched any evidence at the time. Would this new partial profile connect to any of them? The lab ran comparisons against all 3 men's samples, still preserved in evidence storage. All 3 came back negative. The DNA trace from the window didn't belong to any of the original suspects. "So we have unknown DNA mixed with Melissa's blood," Martinez told Robert during their weekly meeting at his kitchen table. "Someone else was involved, someone who was never on our radar." Robert's expression tightened. 15 years of focusing on the wrong people? How is that possible? It happens more often than we'd like to admit, Martinez said gently. Initial theories can create tunnel vision. Evidence that doesn't fit gets minimized or misinterpreted. What now? Robert asked, his voice hollow with the familiar pain of raised and dashed hopes. We go wider, Martinez explained. This partial profile isn't enough for a database match, but it's enough for familial DNA searching. Familial DNA searching represented a revolutionary approach to cold cases. Rather than looking for an exact match in criminal databases, it could identify relatives of an unknown DNA contributor. These genetic connections could then lead investigators to potential suspects never previously considered. Martinez submitted the partial profile to a specialized forensic genealogy service. Weeks passed while algorithms compared the genetic markers against millions of profiles in both criminal and voluntary ancestry databases. Robert and Martinez met regularly, discussing possibilities, reviewing old evidence, waiting for science to open a new path forward. When the results finally arrived, Martinez stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The partial DNA profile showed potential familial connections to several individuals in Ohio. One name in particular made her blood run cold: Edward Bennett, a Cleveland man who had submitted his DNA to an ancestry service 3 years earlier. According to the analysis, Edward shared enough genetic markers with their unknown sample to suggest a close family relationship, possibly a brother or father. What shocked Martinez wasn't the match itself, but Edward Bennett's profession. He was a police officer, a Cleveland police officer who had been with the department since 1999. A Cleveland police officer who, according to personnel records, had worked in the 2nd District in 2006, the same district that handled Melissa Parker's disappearance. Martinez closed her office door and spent hours cross-referencing personnel files with the original investigation records. Officer Edward Bennett had never been officially assigned to Melissa's case, but his name appeared in station logs from those crucial days in October 2006. He had been on duty when Robert Parker first reported his daughter missing. He had helped organize search volunteers at Roosevelt Elementary. He had even been mentioned in witness statements as the helpful patrol officer who checked in with neighborhood residents during the door-to-door canvassing. The implications were staggering. Had a police officer been involved in Melissa's disappearance? Had he used his position to monitor the investigation, perhaps even misdirect it? And if Bennett himself wasn't their unknown DNA contributor, which of his close male relatives was? Martinez knew she needed to proceed with extreme caution. Accusing a fellow officer, even indirectly through a familial DNA connection, required rock-solid evidence. She quietly researched Edward Bennett's family, discovering he had 2 brothers, Michael, a construction worker in Akron, and Thomas, who had died in 2018. If the DNA belonged to any of them, obtaining comparison samples would be essential to determine which Bennett was implicated. Before approaching her supervisor with this explosive development, Martinez decided to dig deeper into Edward Bennett's history. She reviewed his service record, finding a solid but unremarkable career. No disciplinary actions, average performance reviews, a few commendations for community policing efforts. Nothing suggested a man harboring dark secrets. Then she looked into his personal connections and discovered something that made her breath catch. In 2005-2006, Edward Bennett had moonlighted as security for special events at various Cleveland schools. One of those schools was Roosevelt Elementary. Martinez pulled up the staff directory from Roosevelt in 2006, comparing it with Bennett's security assignment dates. There it was. Multiple occasions when Officer Bennett would have been present at the same events as Melissa Parker. The school's spring carnival, a safety awareness week, a community reading night. Their paths had definitely crossed professionally. But was that connection significant or merely coincidental? Martinez needed more before taking such a sensitive theory to her superiors. She decided to approach the investigation from another angle, If Bennett had any involvement with Melissa's disappearance, his movements on October 3, 2006 would be critical. Cleveland police kept detailed duty logs, especially for patrol officers. Martinez requested Bennett's assignment records for October 2006, receiving them 2 days later with a curious note from records management. Some entries appear to have been administratively modified. The logs showed Bennett was assigned to patrol the northwest quadrant of the 2nd District on October 3rd, an area that included parts of Edgewater Park, where Melissa's car was later found. According to check-in records, he had radio contact with dispatch throughout his shift, placing him seemingly in appropriate locations for his patrol route. But the administratively modified notation troubled Martinez. She consulted with a retired records clerk, who explained that such notes typically indicated after-the-fact adjustments to the logs, usually for innocent reasons like correcting times or locations, but sometimes for more concerning purposes. Martinez cross-referenced Bennett's radio check-ins with patrol car GPS data from that day, a relatively new system in 2006 that tracked vehicle locations. The GPS records showed several discrepancies. Between 7:45 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on October 3, 2006, Bennett's patrol car GPS showed him stationary in the Edgewater Park area, while his radio check-ins claimed he was moving through his designated patrol route miles away. Nearly 2 hours unaccounted for, precisely during the window when Melissa Parker vanished. The pieces were aligning in a disturbing pattern, but Martinez still lacked a crucial element: motive. Why would Officer Bennett, by all accounts a decent police officer, target Melissa Parker? What connected them beyond casual professional encounters at Roosevelt Elementary? Martinez decided to interview former Roosevelt staff again, this time asking specifically about Bennett's interactions at the school. Most remembered him only vaguely as that nice officer who helped with security. But the former administrative assistant recalled something potentially significant. Officer Bennett was very friendly with the staff, she told Martinez, especially with Melissa. I remember because there was a small incident during the spring carnival in 2006. Bennett was providing security, and he seemed to be paying special attention to Melissa, bringing her coffee, finding excuses to chat with her. At one point, I overheard him asking if she'd like to get dinner sometime. Melissa politely declined, mentioned she was going through a divorce. Bennett seemed to take it well, but after that he was different around her, watched her a lot, still volunteered for events she coordinated. A rejected romantic advance. Not an uncommon scenario, but potentially significant when connected to the other evidence. Martinez wondered if Bennett's interest in Melissa had escalated beyond appropriate boundaries. Had rejection triggered something darker? With the familial DNA connection, the unexplained time gap on the morning of Melissa's disappearance, and now a potential motive, Martinez felt she had enough to take to her supervisor. The conversation was as difficult as she had anticipated. You're suggesting a 15-year veteran of this department might be connected to a teacher's disappearance based on partial DNA and some scheduling discrepancies, her supervisor asked incredulously. Do you understand the implications if you're wrong? The damage to Bennett's reputation, to the department's credibility. I understand completely, Martinez replied steadily. That's why I've been methodical. That's why I'm not making accusations, just presenting evidence that warrants further investigation. The DNA doesn't lie. The GPS records don't lie. Something happened during those unaccounted hours, and Bennett's familial DNA is somehow connected to this case. After intense debate, her supervisor reluctantly authorized a limited next step, obtaining a DNA sample from Edward Bennett through legal means without alerting him to the investigation. It would be a delicate operation, requiring both patience and subtlety. For weeks, Martinez coordinated with a specialized team to collect discarded items containing Bennett's DNA: a coffee cup from the break room, a water bottle from his gym bag, a cigarette butt from his designated smoking area. Each item was carefully processed, using strict chain of custody protocols to ensure the results would stand up in court. The DNA comparison results arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Martinez opened the email with Robert Parker sitting across from her desk. She had promised to share all developments with him in real time, no matter how difficult. The laboratory conclusion was definitive. Edward Bennett's DNA did not match the sample from Melissa's car window. It wasn't him, but the report continued with a critical finding. The genetic markers shared between Bennett and their unknown sample indicated a different familial relationship than initially assumed. Rather than a brother or father, the unknown DNA likely belonged to Bennett's son. According to records, Edward Bennett had one son, James Bennett, who would have been 21 years old in 2006. A quick background check revealed that James had worked part-time as a delivery driver for a local courier service while attending community college. A delivery driver. The third original suspect, Alan Brenner, had been a delivery driver who serviced Roosevelt Elementary. But what if investigators had identified the right occupation but the wrong person? What if James Bennett, not Alan Brenner, was the delivery driver who had shown inappropriate interest in Melissa? Martinez immediately requested employment records from the courier service. Confirmed to be operating in Cleveland since the early 2000s. The response arrived 2 days later. James Bennett had indeed worked for them from 2005 to 2007 with a delivery route that regularly included Roosevelt Elementary and other locations in Melissa's neighborhood. Furthermore, the company's records showed James Bennett was scheduled to work on October 3, 2006, the day Melissa disappeared. His delivery logs indicated he had made a stop at a business less than 3 blocks from where Melissa's car was last seen on traffic cameras. The connection was electric. James Bennett had access to Roosevelt Elementary through his delivery job. He had potentially met Melissa there. He was in proximity to her last known location on the critical day. And most damning, his DNA appeared to match the unknown sample from Melissa's car. But why hadn't James Bennett ever appeared in the original investigation? Martinez returned to the case files, scouring witness statements and interview transcripts. To her astonishment, she found a single mention. A Roosevelt teacher had told detectives about a young delivery guy who seemed to have a crush on Melissa, but the lead was apparently never pursued. Instead, investigators had focused on Alan Brenner, an older delivery driver with a criminal record who seemed a more likely suspect. Martinez realized with growing certainty what might have happened. Edward Bennett, learning his son was potentially involved, could have used his position to subtly direct suspicion elsewhere. A suggestion here, a misplaced report there, emphasizing Brenner's record while downplaying mentions of his own son. Small actions that, in the chaos of a high-profile investigation, might go unnoticed. The final piece clicked when Martinez discovered that the administrative modifications to Edward Bennett's duty logs had been made by a senior officer who was his close friend and former partner. Bennett likely had called in a favor, creating an alibi for the crucial hours when he might have been helping his son deal with the aftermath of Melissa's disappearance. With this reconstructed narrative, Martinez sought and obtained warrants for James Bennett's DNA, the cell phone records from 2006, archived by the provider, and permission to search the home he'd lived in with his father at the time of Melissa's disappearance. The house had remained in Edward Bennett's possession, though he had since moved to a condo downtown. James now lived in Pittsburgh, working as a regional manager for a shipping company. The search warrant was executed while James was visiting Cleveland for a family event. Officers secured the old Bennett house, focusing on areas that might have remained undisturbed over the years. The attic, storage spaces, crawl spaces, and the detached garage. In a weathered box in the garage rafters, labeled James College, investigators found a chilling item, a phone in a plastic bag, the battery removed. When powered on in the lab, it was confirmed to be Melissa Parker's missing cell phone. The only thing missing from the evidence collected in 2006, James Bennett was brought in for questioning the same day. Now 36, he had built a respectable career and family. seemingly leaving behind whatever had happened in Cleveland 15 years earlier. When confronted with the DNA evidence and the discovery of Melissa's phone, his carefully constructed life crumbled. After consulting with his attorney, James Bennett provided a full confession in exchange for consideration in sentencing. His account filled the gaps in a case that had haunted Cleveland for 15 years. James Bennett sat across the interrogation table from Detective Martinez, his face a study in conflicting emotions, relief at unburdening a 15-year secret, terror at facing consequences, shame at his actions finally exposed to light. His attorney, a stern woman in a charcoal suit, sat beside him, occasionally placing a cautioning hand on his arm when his words strayed towards self-incrimination beyond their plea agreement. "I never meant for any of this to happen," James began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just a kid with a stupid crush that went too far." Martinez kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt a storm of emotions. For 15 years, this man had walked free, while Robert Parker endured a daily nightmare of uncertainty, while Melissa remained missing, presumed dead. "Start from the beginning," Martinez instructed, pressing record on the interview device. "How did you first meet Melissa Parker?" James described delivering packages to Roosevelt Elementary during his route for the courier service. Melissa, who coordinated school events, often signed for deliveries. Over several months in early 2006, he developed an infatuation with her. Her warmth, her smile, the way she remembered his name and asked about his classes at community college. "I started volunteering for the Roosevelt route," James admitted. "Made excuses to talk with her longer, brought her coffee sometimes. I thought we had a connection." In reality, Melissa was simply being kind to a young delivery person, showing the same warmth she extended to everyone. When James finally worked up the courage to ask her to dinner, she gently declined, explaining she was going through a divorce and wasn't ready to date. "I should have accepted that," James said, staring at his hands. "But I convinced myself she just needed time, that she really liked me but was being cautious." His infatuation darkened into obsession. James began adjusting his delivery schedule to coincide with Melissa's arrivals and departures from school. He drove past her townhouse in Tremont, learning her routines. He created fake social media accounts to follow her online activities without her knowledge. On October 2nd, I overheard her on the phone at school, talking about the fall festival, saying she'd be bringing supplies the next morning. James continued. "I decided to wait near her route, just to talk to her again, convince her to give me a chance." The morning of October 3rd, James parked near the intersection of Carnegie Avenue and East 89th Street, knowing Melissa typically passed that way to work. When he spotted her blue Honda at the red light, he pulled behind her, following at a distance until she reached a quiet stretch of road. He flashed his headlights, pretending to be signaling a problem with her car. Melissa, recognizing him as the familiar delivery person from school, pulled over, rolling down her window as James approached. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I just wanted to talk," James told her. "Just give me 5 minutes." When Melissa firmly refused, explaining she was late for a meeting and suggesting they speak at school later, something in James snapped. The rejection felt more personal, more humiliating than before. He reached through the window, grabbing her arm, insisting she listen. Melissa fought back, scratching his face as she attempted to roll up the window. James, panicking, yanked the door open. In the struggle, Melissa's head struck the window frame, leaving the blood smear that would later become crucial evidence. She fell unconscious from the impact. "I didn't know what to do," James said, his voice shaking. "She was hurt. I was scared. I put her in the passenger seat and drove to Edgewater Park to figure things out." At the park, in a remote section of the parking lot, James checked Melissa's pulse, finding it weak but present. As he debated taking her to a hospital, she began to regain consciousness. Disoriented and frightened, she threatened to report the assault to police. James, seeing his future evaporate, made a fatal decision. "I panicked," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I put my hands around her throat and I kept squeezing until she stopped moving. I told myself it was an accident, that I just wanted her to be quiet, but I knew what I was doing. The attorney interjected, reminding James of the terms of his plea agreement. He nodded, composing himself before continuing. After confirming Melissa was dead, James drove her car deeper into the park, carrying her body to a secluded wooded area. Using a small collapsible shovel from his delivery van, typically used for digging out of snow, he dug a shallow grave beneath a stand of oak trees, burying Melissa along with her jacket and shoes. I took her phone because it had my number in it, James explained. I wiped down everything I thought I touched in the car, then left it in the lot where it would eventually be found. James then called his father, Edward Bennett, who was on patrol nearby. I told him I'd done something terrible, that I needed help. He came right away. Officer Bennett, finding his son distraught and bloodied, made the fateful decision that would compound one tragedy with another ethical failure. Rather than reporting the crime, he helped conceal it. He used police cleaning supplies to more thoroughly clean the car, removing most evidence except the small blood smear they overlooked. He altered patrol logs to create an alibi for both himself and his son during the critical hours. Most damning of all, he subtly influenced the early investigation away from his son and toward other suspects. Dad told me to go home, shower, burn my clothes, and never speak of it again, James continued. He said he'd take care of everything. I was terrified, so I did exactly what he said. In the days that followed, as search efforts intensified, Edward Bennett volunteered for search teams, patrol sweeps, and community outreach, not out of dedication to finding Melissa, but to monitor the investigation's progress and ensure it didn't lead to his son. When another delivery driver, Alan Brenner, emerged as a person of interest, Officer Bennett quietly encouraged that line of inquiry, knowing it diverted attention from James. Every time the case seemed to go cold, I thought it was over, James said. But then someone would revive it, and the fear would come back. Dad always assured me they had nothing, that I was safe as long as I stayed quiet. The years passed. James graduated, moved to Pittsburgh, built a career, married, had children. But the shadow of what he'd done followed him. He suffered nightmares, panic attacks, developed a drinking problem that nearly destroyed his marriage. The weight of his secret poisoned every success, every moment of happiness. I'd see missing person cases on the news and feel sick, he admitted. I'd watch Mr. Parker on anniversary vigils and want to confess everything. But then I'd think about my own father going to prison for helping me, about my wife and kids finding out what I'd done, and I'd convince myself to stay silent for one more day. As James Bennett's confession continued, filling in 15 years of guilt and concealment, Martinez felt a complex mixture of emotions. Disgust at the callousness of his actions, anger at the years of deception, but also a profound sense of resolution, the pieces finally fitting together to form a coherent, if tragic, picture. For Robert Parker, watching the recorded confession later in Martinez's office, the truth brought both devastation and a strange form of peace. The uncertainty that had tortured him for 15 years was gone, replaced by the grim reality of what had happened to his daughter. All this time, he said quietly as the recording ended, all these years of searching, and she was at Edgewater Park all along. Martinez nodded solemnly. We'll recover her remains as soon as possible. Mr. Parker, James has provided detailed information about the burial location. Robert's weathered hands trembled as he wiped away tears. Will they both be prosecuted? The son and the father? Yes, Martinez confirmed. James Bennett has agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for his full cooperation. He'll serve a minimum of 15 years. Edward Bennett will face multiple charges: accessory after the fact, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, official misconduct. He's fighting the charges, but with his son's testimony, he'll likely serve significant time. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity. A recovery team worked meticulously at the location James Bennett identified in Edgewater Park, carefully excavating the area beneath the oak trees that had grown larger and stronger in the 15 years since becoming unwitting sentinels over Melissa's grave. The recovery was successful. Despite the passage of time, enough physical evidence remained for positive identification through dental records and DNA comparison with Robert's samples. Fragments of the green cardigan Melissa had worn that October morning were still recognizable, as was the silver bracelet Robert had given her for her 30th birthday. News of the arrests and recovery shocked Cleveland. The dual betrayal, a man who took a young teacher's life and a police officer who helped cover up the crime, struck at the community's sense of trust and safety. That one of their own, sworn to protect and serve, had actively impeded justice for a victim felt like a wound to the city's integrity. The Roosevelt Elementary community, including former colleagues and students who remembered Melissa, held a memorial service in the garden dedicated to her years earlier. Now, instead of representing an ongoing mystery, the garden became a place of remembrance and closure. Melissa loved helping children discover their potential, the current principal said during the service. She believed in second chances, in the power of education to transform lives. While we mourn the truth of her fate, we celebrate the impact she had on countless students during her time with us. Former students, now adults, shared memories of Miss Parker, her creative teaching methods, her patient explanations, her genuine interest in their lives beyond academics. One young woman, now a teacher herself, credited Melissa with inspiring her career choice. "She showed me what it means to teach with both heart and mind. I try to bring that same spirit to my own classroom every day." For Robert Parker, preparing for his daughter's proper burial brought a bittersweet mixture of grief and relief. 15 years of uncertainty had ended, but the finality of death now had to be truly faced. No more searching, no more hoping for a miracle. Instead, the difficult but necessary process of saying a proper goodbye. The funeral was held on a brilliant autumn day, the kind Melissa had loved best. Golden leaves spiraled down from trees surrounding the cemetery, nature's own tribute to a life cut tragically short. Hundreds attended, former students, teachers, community members who had joined searches over the years, even detectives who had worked the case during its various iterations. Detective Anthony Jackson, now retired, approached Robert after the service, his eyes red-rimmed beneath silver brows. "I'm sorry we didn't get it right the first time," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We should have looked harder, questioned more deeply." Robert clasped the older man's hand firmly. "You did your best with what you had. The system failed, not you. One of your own was working against you." Jackson nodded, though the pain of the case's mishandling clearly still weighed heavily on him. "Martinez is something special. Wouldn't let it go, kept pushing when everyone else had moved on. We need more detectives like her." Martinez herself stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing the community's collective grief and healing. She had spent months immersed in Melissa's case, feeling at times as though she knew the woman personally. Seeing her finally laid to rest with dignity and truth brought professional satisfaction, but also a deep sadness for the life that had been so needlessly cut short. As the funeral concluded, Robert Parker approached Martinez, surprising her with a gentle hug. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing it could be solved, for treating Melissa like a person, not just a case number." Martinez nodded, momentarily unable to speak, past the tightness in her throat. When she found her voice, she said simply, "It was an honor to bring her home." In the aftermath of Melissa's case, significant changes rippled through Cleveland's law enforcement community. The revelation that an officer had actively obstructed a major investigation prompted a departmental review of procedures, particularly around case assignments and evidence handling. New safeguards were implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. Mandatory case audits by independent reviewers, stricter chain of custody protocols, better oversight of duty logs, and patrol tracking. The cold case unit, previously understaffed and under-resourced, received increased funding and personnel. Martinez's methodical approach to Melissa's case became a model for reviewing other long-dormant investigations. Within a year, 2 additional cold cases reached resolution, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. For Edward Bennett, the consequences were swift and severe. The same justice system he had served for over 20 years now processed him as a defendant. Fellow officers who had once been colleagues now transported him to court appearances in handcuffs, their faces masks of professional detachment concealing. Profound disappointment and anger at his betrayal of the badge. Despite his initial denials, the evidence against Edward Bennett proved overwhelming. His son's testimony, combined with forensic analysis of the altered duty logs and evidence from his home, left little room for reasonable doubt. Rather than face trial, he eventually accepted a plea deal. 15 years for his role in covering up Melissa's murder and obstructing the investigation. The sentence matched, with bitter symmetry, the number of years he had allowed Melissa's family and community to suffer without answers. James Bennett's sentencing hearing was equally somber. The court was packed with Melissa's former colleagues, students and community members who had followed the case for years. Robert Parker was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement, addressing directly the man who had taken his daughter's life. Robert stood slowly, leaning slightly on a cane, the physical manifestation of 15 years of grief etched into his posture. He placed a photo of Melissa on the podium before him, not the formal portrait that had appeared on missing person flyers, but a candid shot of her laughing in her classroom, surrounded by students' artwork. "This is who my daughter was," Robert began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. Not just a victim, not just a case file. Melissa was a person who brought light into every room she entered. She was a teacher who stayed late to help struggling students. A daughter who called her old dad every evening just to check in. A friend who remembered birthdays and showed up when needed. He paused, gathering himself before continuing. "For 15 years, I've carried the weight of not knowing. I've walked the shores of Lake Erie in winter storms, searched abandoned buildings in summer heat, handed out thousands of flyers to strangers who gradually stopped meeting my eyes. I've lit candles on birthdays spent without her, set a place at Christmas dinners she never came home to attend." Robert's gaze shifted directly to James Bennett, who sat with shoulders slumped, unable to meet the older man's eyes. "I want you to understand what you took from this world," Robert continued. "Not just my daughter's life, though that alone is an unforgivable theft. You took from her students the teacher who believed in them when no one else did. You took from her friends the loyalty and laughter they cherished. You took from me the chance to see her fulfill her dreams, to perhaps walk her down the aisle someday, to know her children." The courtroom remained utterly silent. Collective breath held as Robert delivered his final thoughts. "I have lived with grief and uncertainty for 15 years. You will now live with the consequences of your actions for at least that long. The difference is, you will know exactly where you are and why you're there. You will have the certainty I was denied. And when you are eventually released, perhaps you will use whatever remains of your life to somehow honor the life you took, to contribute something positive to this world that has continued to turn without Melissa in it." As Robert returned to his seat, the judge thanked him for his powerful statement before pronouncing sentence, 25 years for second-degree murder, with possibility of parole after 15 years. James Bennett was led away in handcuffs, head bowed, the weight of justice finally falling on shoulders that had evaded it for too long. Outside the courthouse, beneath a sky remarkably similar to the one that had witnessed Melissa's final morning. 15 years earlier, Robert Parker faced a forest of news microphones and cameras. Despite his fatigue, he spoke with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Today doesn't bring Melissa back," he told the assembled reporters. "No sentence can restore what was taken from her students, from her community, from me. But truth matters. Justice matters, even when delayed. Today, Melissa's story is complete. Not the ending any of us wanted for her, but an ending that allows us to finally move forward with honoring her memory." A reporter called out, "Mr. Parker, how do you feel about the police department's failure to solve this case for 15 years? Robert considered the question carefully. Systems fail when individuals make wrong choices. Officer Bennett betrayed his oath to protect and serve, but Detective Martinez honored that same oath by refusing to let this case remain unsolved. I prefer to focus on those who ultimately brought truth to light, rather than those who tried to bury it." Another asked, "Will you continue to be involved with missing persons advocacy now that Melissa's case is closed?" Robert nodded firmly. "More than ever. I know firsthand the agony of uncertainty, the painful limbo between hope and grief. If my experience can help other families navigate that terrible journey, or perhaps help bring other missing loved ones home, then something meaningful can grow from our tragedy." In the months that followed, Robert Parker channeled his energy into creating the Melissa Parker Foundation for Missing Persons. Using funds from a settlement with the city over the mishandling of his daughter's case, he established a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting both families of missing persons and the law enforcement agencies working to find them. The foundation provided resources often overlooked in missing persons cases: mental health counseling for families, training for law enforcement in modern investigative techniques, grants for DNA analysis in cold cases, and community awareness programs to keep missing persons in the public consciousness. Detective Sofia Martinez became a frequent speaker at the Foundation's events, sharing insights from her experience with Melissa's case and others. Her methodical approach to cold cases gained national attention, inspiring similar initiatives in police departments across the country. "Cold cases aren't really cold," Martinez often said in her presentations. "They're just waiting for someone to shine the right light from the right angle. Every unsolved case has that one thread that, when pulled properly, unravels the entire mystery." The Roosevelt Elementary Memorial Garden for Melissa was expanded, featuring a small lending library where students could borrow books freely, a tribute to Melissa's belief in making education accessible to everyone. Each autumn, on the anniversary of her recovery rather than her disappearance, the school held a community service day in her honor, encouraging students and staff to contribute positively to Cleveland neighborhoods. Robert Parker found a measure of peace in these developments. The crushing weight of uncertainty had been lifted, replaced by the more natural grief of known loss. He still visited Melissa's grave weekly, bringing fresh flowers and sharing quiet updates about the Foundation's work. But the desperate searching had ended. In its place came purposeful action that helped others while honoring his daughter's memory. On the 5th anniversary of Melissa's recovery and the resolution of her case, Robert dedicated a bench in Cleveland's public square. The simple plaque read, "In memory of Melissa Parker, teacher, daughter, friend, and all those still missing. May truth find its way home." At the dedication ceremony, Robert spoke briefly but powerfully about the dual nature of closure, the pain of confirmed loss balanced against the relief of ending uncertainty. 15 years of not knowing became the heaviest burden I ever carried, he told the gathered crowd. The truth, however painful, allowed me to set that burden down and begin to heal. Through this foundation, through this memorial, Melissa continues to teach about resilience, about justice, about never giving up on those who are lost. Martinez, attending the ceremony in civilian clothes rather than her detective's attire, reflected on how one cold case had transformed both her career and Cleveland's approach to missing persons. The department now had protocols ensuring cases remained active rather than simply filed away. Resources were allocated more equitably, regardless of the missing person's background or circumstances. Cold cases received regular review with fresh perspectives and modern technology. As dusk fell over Cleveland that evening, the lights around Public Square illuminated Robert Parker sitting alone on the newly dedicated bench, his face peaceful as he watched the city continue its eternal rhythm of movement and life. A city forever changed by one teacher's disappearance and the 15-year journey to bring her home. In the distance, the lights of the police department glowed steadily. Inside, in the cold case unit Martinez now supervised, other families waited for answers, other mysteries sought resolution. The work continued, inspired by a case that proved time might obscure the truth, but with persistence and dedication could never fully hide it. And somewhere, perhaps, Melissa Parker's spirit found rest in knowing that her story, though ended in tragedy, had become a catalyst for change, a beacon guiding other lost souls home, and a testament to a father's love that never wavered through 15 years of darkness until it finally helped lead the way to light. The ripples of Melissa Parker's case extended far beyond Cleveland, ultimately transforming how missing persons cases were handled nationwide. 5 years after James and Edward Bennett began serving their sentences, Robert Parker's advocacy through the Melissa Parker Foundation caught the attention of federal lawmakers. His testimony before a congressional committee, recounting the 15-year search for his daughter and the systemic failures that delayed justice, moved even the most stoic politicians. "No family should endure what mine did," Robert stated, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "Every missing person deserves a thorough investigation, regardless of their age or circumstances. Every family deserves answers, whether those answers bring joy or heartbreak." The resulting legislation, informally known as Melissa's Law, established national standards for missing persons investigations, including mandatory evidence preservation, regular cold case reviews using updated technology, and improved coordination between jurisdictions. The law also created a dedicated funding stream for applying modern forensic techniques to long-dormant cases. Detective Sophia Martinez, whose persistence had cracked the Parker case, became a sought-after consultant, traveling across the country to train law enforcement in cold case methodology. Her approach emphasized both technological innovation and human intuition, the combination that had ultimately brought Melissa home. "Technology gives us tools, but compassion gives us purpose," Martinez often told her trainees. "When you look at a case file, see the person behind the paper. Remember that someone is waiting for answers, someone whose life is suspended in uncertainty." Her methods yielded remarkable results. Within 3 years of implementing Martinez's protocols, police departments reported a 32% increase in cold case clearances nationwide. Families who had lived in limbo for decades finally received the closure that had eluded them for so long. Among them was the Harris family from Cincinnati, whose daughter Rebecca had vanished in 1994 while walking home from a concert. The case had gone cold despite extensive searches, but using Martinez's approach, investigators identified DNA on Rebecca's recovered backpack that led to a convicted felon, ready serving time for unrelated offenses. When the detective called to tell us they'd found Rebecca's remains, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 27 years, Rebecca's mother told reporters. "The not knowing was like drowning slowly, day after day. Now we can finally mourn her properly and begin to heal." As these successes accumulated, the Parker Foundation expanded its mission, creating a nationwide network of volunteer experts, retired detectives, forensic specialists, search coordinators, and family advocates who could deploy quickly to assist local agencies with missing persons cases. Robert called them Melissa's Angels, a term that stuck as the initiative gained national recognition. The foundation also established a scholarship program for students pursuing careers in forensic science, criminology, or victims advocacy. Each year, 10 Melissa Parker scholars received full funding for their education in exchange for a commitment to work on cold cases for at least 5 years after graduation. Education was Melissa's passion, Robert explained at the scholarship's launch. She believed in unlocking human potential. These scholarships continue her work by preparing the next generation of professionals who will bring answers to waiting families. Through these efforts, Melissa's story transformed from a tragedy into a catalyst for systemic change. Her name became synonymous not with victimhood, but with justice, persistence, and hope. Meanwhile, life continued its inexorable forward movement. Cleveland evolved, with new buildings rising where vacant lots once stood, new families moving into the neighborhood where Melissa had lived, new children filling the classrooms at Roosevelt Elementary. The city neither forgot nor remained trapped in the past. Instead, it carried her memory forward as it grew and changed. At Roosevelt Elementary, Melissa's influence remained vibrant through the lending library and annual service day. 10 years after the resolution of her case, the school dedicated a new STEAM lab in her honor, recognizing her early advocacy for integrating arts into traditional science and math education. The ribbon-cutting ceremony brought together former colleagues, students, and community members whose lives she had touched. One former student, now a pediatrician, recalled how Miss Parker had recognized her interest in medicine long before she acknowledged it herself. She brought in articles about women in medicine, arranged for me to meet a doctor during career day, and never let me believe that my background would limit my future. When I doubted myself in medical school, I remembered her faith in me and kept going. Another, who had struggled with reading in Melissa's class, shared how her patient, creative approaches had finally helped him break through. She made reading a game instead of a chore. She found books about things I was interested in: sports, cars, space. She stayed after school to help me when others had given up. Now I'm an English teacher, using her methods with my own struggling students. These testimonials painted a portrait of Melissa far more nuanced and impactful than the tragic figure who had dominated headlines. They restored her humanity, her agency, her significance beyond her disappearance and death. Robert Parker, now in his 80s but still sharp and engaged, attended each event, watching with quiet pride as his daughter's legacy continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The foundation that bore her name had grown beyond his initial vision, employing a full-time staff of 20 and coordinating thousands of volunteers nationwide. "I sometimes think about what Melissa would make of all this," he confided to Martinez during the STEAM lab dedication. "She was never one for the spotlight. She just wanted to make a difference in her own classroom with her own students." "She'd be proud," Martinez replied confidently, "not of the attention, but of the impact. Every cold case solved, every family that finds answers, every change in how missing persons are treated, that's her influence continuing." Robert nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think you're right. She always said that teaching was about planting seeds you might never see grow. She's certainly done that." James Bennett, meanwhile, served his sentence at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. During his initial years of incarceration, he maintained the defensive posture common to many inmates, keeping to himself and merely going through the motions of mandated rehabilitation programs. But in his 6th year of imprisonment, something shifted. A restorative justice initiative brought victim advocates to speak with offenders about the ripple effects of violent crime. Among the speakers was a mother whose daughter, like Melissa, had been killed by someone she barely knew. Her raw account of 15 years of grief, the missed holidays, the empty chair at family gatherings, the grandchildren who would never be born, pierced through James's carefully constructed emotional barriers. For perhaps the first time, he fully confronted the magnitude of what he had done, not just ending Melissa's life, but creating endless shockwaves of pain that continued to reverberate through countless lives. The realization drove him to his knees, physically overwhelmed by the weight of his actions. In the aftermath of this breakdown came a slow rebuilding. James began participating earnestly in counseling, confronting the distorted thinking that had led to his obsession with Melissa and his fatal decision that October morning. He enrolled in educational programs, eventually earning a degree in computer programming through a prison education initiative. Most significantly, he reached out to the Parker Foundation with a letter addressed to Robert. The handwritten pages expressed remorse without seeking forgiveness, acknowledged responsibility without offering excuses, and asked nothing in return. He simply wanted Robert to know that he finally understood, as much as anyone who hasn't lived it could understand, the suffering he had caused. Robert's response, which arrived weeks later, was brief but profound. Understanding is the beginning. What you do with that understanding determines whether Melissa's death becomes merely a tragedy or also the catalyst for something better. That choice is yours now. Those words became James's guiding principle. While continuing to serve his sentence, he developed a program to educate young men about obsessive behavior, consent, and the early warning signs of dangerous fixation. The curriculum, reviewed and approved by psychologists and victim advocates, was eventually implemented in several correctional facilities and in an adapted form in high schools throughout Ohio. "I can never undo what I did," James told participants in these sessions. "I can never restore what I took from Melissa Parker, from her father, from her students and friends and community. But I can use my story to prevent others from making similar choices, to help young men recognize and address unhealthy patterns before they escalate." This work did not erase his crime or reduce his sentence. It did not earn him special treatment or early release. It simply represented his attempt to extract something constructive from the destruction he had caused, to ensure that Melissa's death, while senseless and undeserved, was not entirely without meaning. Edward Bennett, conversely, remained unrepentant. The former officer maintained his position that he had merely protected his son from a justice system he deemed flawed and excessive. He rebuffed rehabilitation programs, refused to acknowledge the additional trauma his actions had caused the Parker family, and used his law enforcement background to navigate prison politics with minimal personal discomfort. The contrast between father and son became a case study in criminal justice circles, how the same crime could produce such divergent responses, how genuine remorse might coexist with entrenched denial, how accountability could either be embraced or evaded. During a parole hearing in his 12th year of incarceration, Edward Bennett still showed no remorse, arguing instead that his actions had been misunderstood and his punishment disproportionate. The parole board, which included a representative from the Parker Foundation as allowed under Melissa's law, unanimously denied his application. Mr. Bennett continues to demonstrate the same disregard for justice and truth that characterized his original offenses, their decision stated. Until he acknowledges the harm caused by his actions and shows genuine remorse, he remains a poor candidate for early release. The following year, Edward Bennett died in prison from complications of pneumonia, his secrets and justifications accompanying him to the grave. James attended the prison funeral service, a solitary figure in the sparsely populated chapel. The father's unrepentant passing served as a stark reminder of how differently their shared crime had shaped their respective journeys. 15 years to the day after Melissa's case was solved, marking a symmetry with the 15 years it had remained unsolved. The Parker Foundation held a national conference on cold case investigation in Cleveland. Law enforcement professionals, forensic experts, family advocates, and technology specialists gathered to share advances in the field and commemorate the case that had sparked so many reforms. The conference's keynote address was delivered jointly by Robert Parker and Detective Sophia Martinez, now the head of a multi-state cold case task force. Their presentation chronicled not just Melissa's case, but the transformation of missing persons investigations that had followed. 15 years ago today, Martinez began, we finally answered the question that had haunted Cleveland since 2006. What happened to Melissa Parker? That answer came too late for Melissa herself, but it arrived just in time to save countless others whose cases might otherwise have remained unsolved. Robert continued, his voice strong despite his advanced years. When Melissa disappeared, missing persons cases were often treated as low priorities. Evidence languished untested. Witness statements gathered dust in storage. Families were left to search alone, with dwindling hope and resources. Today, Martinez added, we have mandatory evidence preservation, regular case reviews with modern technology, DNA databases that grow more comprehensive each year, family liaisons who keep loved ones informed throughout investigations, and perhaps most importantly, a recognition that every missing person deserves our best efforts, regardless of their age, background, or circumstances. The audience, filled with professionals who dealt daily with the darkest aspects of human behavior, responded with a standing ovation that continued for several minutes. It was an acknowledgement not just of the speakers, but of how far the field had come, and of the woman whose story had catalyzed that progress. As the applause finally subsided, Robert shared a final reflection. My daughter taught elementary school for 8 years before she was taken from us. In that time, she touched perhaps 200 young lives directly. Through this foundation, through Melissa's law, through each of you and your work, her influence now extends to thousands. Every person found, every family given answers, every cold case resolved. That's Melissa's extended classroom now. The conference concluded with the unveiling of a new initiative, the Melissa Parker Cold Case Database, a centralized system allowing law enforcement agencies nationwide to cross-reference unsolved disappearances and unidentified remains. The system utilized advanced algorithm matching and artificial intelligence to identify potential connections that human analysts might miss. This database represents the culmination of everything we've learned since Melissa's case, Martinez explained during the demonstration. It combines cutting-edge technology with human insight, creating a tool that can see patterns across jurisdictions, across decades, even across seemingly unrelated cases. Within its first year of operation, the database helped resolve 27 long-dormant cases, including some dating back to the 1970s. Families who had lived with uncertainty for generations finally received the answers they had sought for so long. The system became known informally among law enforcement as Melissa's Memory, a fitting tribute to a teacher whose legacy now included educating investigators on the power of persistence and innovation. As Robert Parker entered his 90s, he gradually stepped back from active involvement in the Foundation's daily operations, though he remained its inspirational center. He moved into an assisted living community not far from Roosevelt Elementary, where students still visited regularly to read to him from the books in Melissa's lending library. His apartment walls displayed photos spanning decades, Melissa as a child, as a college graduate, as a young teacher surrounded by smiling students. Alongside these were newer images, scholarship recipients in their graduation regalia, families reunited with missing loved ones, cold case detectives receiving training at Foundation seminars. People sometimes ask if I found peace, Robert told a documentary filmmaker who interviewed him on the 20th anniversary of Melissa's recovery. Peace isn't quite the right word. I've found purpose. I've found meaning in the senseless. I've found a way to ensure that Melissa's story didn't end in that shallow grave at Edgewater Park. He gestured to a framed letter on his wall, one of thousands the Foundation had received over the years. It was from a mother in Oregon whose son had disappeared while hiking in 2010. 11 years later, using methods pioneered by the Parker Foundation, investigators had located his remains, determined he had died in an accident, and brought him home for proper burial. "Without you and your daughter," the letter read, "I would still be searching, still wondering, still unable to grieve or move forward. You've given me the gift of certainty, painful though it is. Your Melissa has brought my Michael home." Robert's eyes misted as he regarded the letter. That's Melissa's real legacy, not the foundation or the law or the database that bears her name. It's the families who no longer live in limbo. It's the truth brought to light after years of darkness. It's the certainty that allows grief to finally begin its healing work. In the years that followed, as Robert's health gradually declined, the Parker Foundation continued to evolve and expand. Its methodologies were adopted internationally, its training programs translated into multiple languages, its database linked with similar systems worldwide. The principles that had guided Melissa as a teacher, persistence, creativity, unwavering belief in potential, now guided investigators around the globe. When Robert Parker passed away peacefully at 96, his funeral was attended by hundreds, including retired Detective Anthony Jackson, Detective Sophia Martinez, now Commissioner Martinez, former students of Melissa's, scholarship recipients, foundation staff, and families who had found answers through the organization's work. Martinez delivered the eulogy, her voice steady despite her grief. Robert Parker turned the darkest chapter of his life into light for countless others. He transformed a personal tragedy into a movement that has brought truth and closure to families around the world. He showed us that even the coldest case can be solved with enough persistence, innovation, and heart. She paused, gesturing to the assembled crowd. "Look around this room. Every person here represents lives touched by the Parker family, first by Melissa in her classroom, then by Robert through the foundation. Their influence continues through each of us as we carry forward their work of teaching, of searching, of bringing light to darkness." Robert was laid to rest beside Melissa in Cleveland's Lakeview Cemetery, their shared headstone bearing an inscription he had chosen years earlier. "The truth may sleep, but it never dies." As mourners departed, placing white roses on both graves, Martinez remained behind, standing silently in the autumn sunshine. Golden leaves spiraled down around her, bringing to mind Robert's words about his daughter's love for the season when the world felt most alive just as everything was preparing to sleep. A fitting metaphor, Martinez thought, for how Melissa and Robert Parker had transformed an ending into countless new beginnings, for the families who found answers, for the investigators who discovered new methods, for a system that learned to value every missing person as someone worth finding, no matter how cold the trail. The search for Melissa Parker had ended, but the searching she inspired continued around the world, bringing light to cases long consigned to darkness, answers to questions long abandoned as unanswerable, and closure to families who had nearly forgotten how to hope. In Cleveland and far beyond, her story had become more than a tragedy. It had become a legacy of transformation, persistence, and the enduring power of truth to emerge, even after 15 years of silence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.